This is Pretty in Practice, the podcast.
Opinions expressed on this podcast are solely those of our own as well as our guests and do not reflect the views and opinions of our respective employers, organizations, academic institutions, committees, other groups, or individuals.
Welcome back to another episode of Pretty in Practice, the podcast. And today we are so excited to have our special guest returning for part 2 with us. She's a registered dietitian. She's also the owner of Nutrition with Intention. We have Ms. Sarah Muhammad returning to talk a little bit more about nutrition. If you missed the first episode, go back and listen. She gave you some insights into her world as a dietetic, and then she also gave an excellent breakdown of Nutrition 101. So definitely resourceful information. So go back and tap into that and get to learn a little bit more about how to choose your nutrition more efficiently. On this episode, we'll start talking about the impact of nutrition. A lot of people don't know that nutrition impacts so much in your body, so we'll dive in there. But first, we are going to jump into our doctor's diary segment. So today's question is, what's the best trip, and from a traveling standpoint, what's the best trip you've ever had? And I'm going to come to our guest, Sarah, first.
Yeah, hey, thank you guys for having me again. Wow, this is really difficult to answer just because I came back from a really nice trip last week. I was in Belize. Best trip that I've ever had, I would probably say Ghana, just because it was my first international trip, and it was the first time that I ever was like on a plane. Even I was 19, and it was an 11-hour flight. So imagine that, like, first time. I mean, we had the connecting flight to JFK in New York, but like after that it's 11 hours straight. But such a rich cultural experience. Really enjoyed it. Obviously, like, they have different food there, different style of food, West African. I really do want to go back again because it'll be our 10-year anniversary for that trip next year. So maybe I could swing something. I don't know. That's probably like my favorite trip, the best trip I've had.
I want to go there so bad.
Yes.
Wow,
I can jump in and... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Justice. Let us know. What's yours?
I'm going to piggyback off hers and say that my favorite was Kenya. So not too far off, the different foods, the different experiences. The coolest part was the safari. We were so close to the animals. We seen lions, elephants. It was super exciting to see animals roaming in their free homes and not in a zoo. Like, it was just very different.
I don't know if I can top the motherland. I definitely want to get to Africa one day soon. But from what I have been able to explore this far is me and my husband, each year we go on an anniversary trip. And the last trip we went on was to Tulum. And when I say we had a time in Tulum. But the best part of it, though, actually, because you go through Playa del Carmen to get to Tulum, so we stayed there for one night, and we went to this park, and it was called Explorer Park, which was like a Riviera Mayan excursion. It was crazy. It was like 7 different type of activities. We ziplined through fire in the dark over the highway. We were doing like underwater excursions. Like, it was just really crazy. I felt like I was in the movie. So if y'all into that, check out Explore. It is amazing.
Nice.
That's so nice. I would say my favorite trip was probably going to Greece. I went to Greece my senior year at Purdue.
So bad.
It was a study abroad trip. And it was a 10-day trip, and we went to so many different places within the country. We went to Palamidi, Nafplio, Sparta, Athens. Like, we literally, like, pretty much did a whole Greek tour in 10 days.
Wow.
And it was super nice. And I think I really enjoyed that experience because I didn't know anyone. So, like, it forced me to make friends. And I actually made some friends. Like, they were so nice. It was super, super cool. Definitely love it. And then Greece is just breathtaking. Like, it is the most beautiful, okay, second most beautiful place I've ever been.
And this was high school? What type of high
No,
school you
this
go to?
was at Purdue. My
Oh,
senior
Purdue.
year of
Okay,
What
got
type
it.
of high
I was like,
school?
oh, okay.
Girl, no. I wish.
I'm like, they fancy. They fancy.
Right.
My favorite trip was also in Europe. So
knew
just a
it.
little bit of you already know. Just a little bit of background. I actually started taking French when I was in 6th grade. It was like a requirement, and then I actually really enjoyed it. So I took it all throughout middle school, all throughout high school, and then I decided to go ahead and minor in it in college. And so my dad had promised me in high school that he would one day take me to Paris for sticking with it so long. And finally, when I moved to Florida, it was always like super expensive. And so when I finally came down here and moved to South Florida, I found a really good flight, and I was like, Dad, it's time. Like, I've been waiting this long. Like, let's do it.
Yeah.
So spring break of my first year of grad school, me and my dad, we actually did the Paris trip. And it was the best trip of my entire life. It rained every single day, but I loved it. It was like a dream come true. I had waited for this like my entire, like so much of my life. And it was just such a bonding experience for me and my dad. I still to this day, like we always talk, like we got to do round 2. Like, I mean, that trip was everything. And so like, yeah, so it was amazing, and to like finally get to use this language with like people that speak it all the time. It was like really nice. I remember I was boarding the plane, and this really nice French lady, my dad was like forcing me to like talk to people in French. He's like, so this is her trip. I'm taking her on. So you can't speak to her in English. Like, he was literally telling the waiters, like, you can't speak to her in English. Like, she has to speak French to you. So it was a really awesome trip. Like, I absolutely loved it. And I've been a lot of places, but that one definitely tops everything.
That's beautiful. Shout out to your dad for taking you there. That's
Right.
beautiful.
Yeah, he a real one. Oh, Lord. So let's go ahead and we're gonna go ahead and dive into part 2, of course. So Sarah, my first question for you is, how does nutrition impact additional aspects of our bodies, such as our mental health, our gut health, our skin? Can you tell us just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it impacts so many different things. So, you know, the vitamins and nutrients that we get from our food are really the building blocks for our health on a cellular level. So when you think about all of your different organ systems and thinking about like different issues that you may have with them, you really want to question like, what type of nutrition am I getting, and is it supporting these different systems? So for instance, if folks are having like gut health issues, one of the big things you may want to ask yourself is, am I getting enough fiber in my diet? Because we know through the research that diets that are poor in fiber intake really impacts the growth of healthy gut bacteria that we have. And we have most of our immune system is located in our digestive system. So then it starts to play a role in other aspects of our health, such as mood. You know, it's very interconnected. And like I said, it's all very like nuanced, but it plays such a big role.
And Sarah, on the first episode, you talked about irritable bowel syndrome and suffering with that. And I also suffer with IBS, as they call it. And I know a lot of young women do as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the impact of nutrition with IBS, or any advice or guidance that you have found to help people suffering with that condition?
Yeah, so irritable bowel syndrome is a syndrome because it's made up of a lot of different like characteristics. So if you're unable to like diagnose something such as like inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, you start to look at other factors like you know, are you having gas and bloating? Are you having like pain? So I was experiencing those things, and you know, going to get a colonoscopy, there was no like clear sign of any intestinal damage that I have. So that's what really like classifies as a syndrome. I would say really looking at the nutritional factors and non-nutritional factors. So the nutritional factors would be, like I said, am I eating a diet that's rich in fiber? Like, am I having regular bowel movements? If you feel like you may need a boost in healthy bacteria in your gut, like just taking a daily probiotic, and there are so many different ones out there. You don't need like the most fancy one. You could just take like a basic daily one. I think a Lyme probiotic is like a really good one for just daily use. Non-nutritional factors, number one, are just going to be stress. Like, stress kills the gut. That's something that we learned very early. So like looking at different factors of stress in your both intrinsically and extrinsically. And that could be like good stress and bad stress, because they both do exist. But if you are constantly like anxious or nervous, like even in a happy way, your body doesn't necessarily register it in that way, which really kind of sucks. But you just have to kind of do like a self-check and like say, you know, am I stressed about something, and do I have like stress management techniques?
That's a good tip. And I know a lot of people don't even relate stress with their gut or nutrition. So
Not at all.
putting you up on, yeah, definitely good advice there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, slight tangent. I have acid reflux, and my doctor challenged me to go off of my medication during the summer when I wasn't in school to see if it was stress induced, because we couldn't find like a trigger food. And indeed, it is stress induced acid reflux. Like, it's not the food, it is nothing that I'm doing wrong. It is literally like the amount of stress that I'm constantly under being in medical school that like triggers my body to act a complete fool on me. So
Yeah.
I feel you, Sarah. I feel you.
Yeah. It's crazy what you learn about your body.
Yep.
Sarah, can I ask what, because like a lot of people don't know stress causes, like you found out about acid reflux, you just talked about IBS. Is there anything that is so non-traditional that people wouldn't even really relate nutrition with this aspect, but it does impact it? Like, is there something that you figured out through your schooling that, you know, school actually impacts X, Y, and Z, and I never even knew that?
I guess I can answer, like, if you're asking about like maybe alternative therapies to different chronic illnesses, like,
Oh, that's good. I wasn't asking that, but let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go down that route.
yeah, so just like alternative therapies would be like going to like a chiropractor, making sure that you have good like spinal alignment, acupuncture, like to hit your pressure points, meditation. Therapy is, you know, good for cognitive and mental health, obviously. So all these different things can be, I don't even like using the term like alternative therapies, because they're really like complementary to like what we consider to be traditional medicine, and they do play a big role. So I use these therapies myself to really help with my stress management and to help with my overall wellness.
Okay, nice.
We've all took a peek at your business Instagram, Nutrition with Intention RD, and we were just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what you do there and how that can be a resource to maybe some of our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So since I have a traditional 9 to 5, it's really just a way for me to reach people that are not in my area. Everything nowadays is really through social media, so to speak. So I wanted to be able to offer nutrition counseling to folks if they're not in the Chicagoland area.
Nice. And you all can find that. Go look up on Instagram, Nutrition with Intention RD, correct, Sarah?
Yes, Nutrition with Intention RD on Instagram. So nutrition counseling. I also do like presentations. And then if you are local, like I can come and do like in-person presentations. So that's what I'm working on right now. Different community organizations, seeing if they are interested in having a dietitian come to speak to their population. Folks that may like take classes at their location or receive other non-nutrition related services.
Okay, awesome.
Is there any like particular criteria, Sarah, that or like pretty much anyone that is interested in getting some services, they can pretty much just set up an appointment for a consultation, or are there any other steps that they would need to take?
No real criteria. I'm in the process of getting credentialed through insurance, so I'm not currently. It is a very arduous process, unfortunately. So I'm in the process of being able to do that so that people with insurance have access, because it can be a little bit pricier to pay out of pocket just for anything that you're getting health-wise. But no real criteria. Like if people are interested, I do a 45-minute consultation with them for free, just to assess like what are they struggling with, what do they need more help with, all of those things prior to actually deciding to work together.
Nice.
Oh, I love that. Okay, tap in 45 minutes for free, everyone. So no excuses. She's offering this for free. Another thing we did notice that you focus on, and it's a passion area of mine, is education of diabetes. And we know diabetes largely impacts the Black community. But can you talk about what you do there in terms of educating on diabetes from like a nutritional perspective?
Yes, so in my diabetes clinic, so I work with an endocrinologist. At our location, we have clinic twice a week, and so I see the type 2 diabetes patients, and whatever type 1s that we have come in. We may have like 1 or 2 type 1s come in a month. But for type 2, it's really just educating them on both diet and medication use. So with diabetes, what happens over time is that if it's poorly managed for so long, it creates cellular and vascular damage in the body. So it becomes really hard to really enter into a reversal of having high elevated blood sugar levels. So some folks do get to a point where like their main goal is really just management and getting to an A1C that is reasonable, which in our clinic, the standard is 7%. You want your A1C to be 7% or lower to be considered well managed. So in regards to nutrition, the way I teach in the clinic is really like how to balance out your plate, because that's the easiest model for folks to really understand. So we use the My Plate method, which shows that you want your half of your plate to be non-starchy vegetables, and they can be any non-starchy vegetables. And this is really for a number of different reasons, right? We talked a bit before about fiber intake. If you are increasing your fiber intake, it offsets the blood sugar spike that you may be experiencing from other starches or sugars that you consume as carbohydrates. So ensuring that you have half a plate of non-starchy vegetables really helps with that blood sugar balance. 1/4 plate of starches, that can include grains, and that can also include starchy vegetables like potatoes, corn, peas, and then 1/4 of lean protein. So this is the model for which we try to have our patients follow to ensure that they are giving themselves enough chance to really manage through their diet so that they can reduce their medication use. So our main goal is, diet and lifestyle modification in order to reduce and or eliminate medication use altogether. So if you take a high amount of insulin, you'll probably, if you do go with your diet, you can come down on the insulin significantly. Those are the type of things that we really go through in clinic.
I love that. And I know I manage patients from a pharmaceutical management standpoint, but even when patients are on insulin or any other type of drugs, I try to also let them know that they can come off those drugs, because people don't know that you can manage your nutrition and actually come off those drugs. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Absolutely. So, it's like you kind of just have to think about, how did I get here and how do I really, fix the issues that I have. It's like if diet got you here, poor diet got you here, then adequate diet is going to be like the best lifestyle measure in addition to exercise and physical activity.
I wanted to clear up a couple things as a future patient educator. Sarah mentioned that she works with an endocrinologist. So for any of our listeners who don't know what an endocrinologist is, so that's a doctor who has special training in diagnosing and treating disorders of the endocrine system. So that's like the glands and organs inside of our bodies that makes the hormones. So that's why most people will go see an endocrinologist if they're having some kind of like hormonal issue, and diabetes is one of those things because insulin is considered like a peptide hormone, and then there's like glucagon, like there's other hormones that are involved in the whole like diabetes pathology. So that's what Sarah works with. She works with an endocrinologist, and she also mentioned like type 1 and type 2. And so again, for our listeners who aren't too familiar with that, she just means like a type 1 diabetic versus a type 2 diabetic. And so with that kind of like moves me into our next question. What role does diet and nutrition play in preventing or living with diabetes? And Sarah, since I already brought up type 1 and type 2, can you just briefly explain what a type 1 diabetic is versus a type 2 diabetic, and then that impact of diet and nutrition in type 2 diabetics?
Yeah, absolutely. So, type 1 diabetes is really defined as an autoimmune disorder. It involves the destruction of cells called beta cells, which produce insulin in the body. So, you see, like in younger folks, usually, maybe like in your teens to like your early 20s or 30s, is usually where people get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And really, there's no way to prevent that. It's really the luck of the draw. These folks are also insulin dependent, so they cannot take oral medication to manage their diabetes. They have to take insulin. So that's going to be for type 1. And so, like I said, only about 5% of those that are diagnosed with diabetes in the U.S. are type 1 diabetics. The other 95% are really going to be your type 2s. Which, that's more lifestyle related. So as you go through life, as we become more sedentary, as our diet starts to change, as our stress levels increase, it becomes a larger risk factor, especially for those in the Black population, because we do experience a lot of stress that is unique to our community. So it definitely changes the way our body processes our food. And if you're already eating a diet that's not nutritionally adequate on top of that, it just makes you have a much higher risk factor for developing insulin resistance, and then which leads to higher blood sugar levels, and then eventually that leads you to the diabetes diagnosis. So type 2 is defined as having an A1C, which is the blood level that is used to determine how your blood sugar is managed. Your A1C above 6.4% is how they technically define having type 2 diabetes.
Thank you for that. And so what advice do you have then for our listeners, let's say, who was told before that they're pre-diabetic, or for actual listeners who do have diabetes? What are some of the dietetic or nutritional decisions that they can make to help themselves?
Yeah, just starting to see examining your diet and what you eat, and seeing if it is nutritionally adequate or nutritionally optimal, as I would like to say. Are you consuming foods that are high in vitamins and nutrients? Are you consuming foods that have high fiber? Are you consuming lean proteins? Are you limiting your sugar intake? Are you getting enough daily activity just through cardio activity, or if you go to the gym and you do strength training or muscle building activities? And the reason I mentioned that is because, as a dietitian, we're expected to really only know about nutrition, but with exercise also plays a really big role in your diabetes management, because if you're eating carbohydrates and you exercise regularly, that sugar leaves the blood and it goes to the muscles for energy. And so that's also a mechanism by which your body is actually utilizing those carbs in an effective way versus storing them. And once you store too many of these nutrients, that's when you start to run into a problem. So really asking yourself, is my diet balanced? Is it nutritionally adequate? Am I eating things that are high in vitamins and nutrients? More whole foods, so not the store, but actual whole foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, healthy fats.
Thank you for that. And I just wanted to share with you all like some of the complications of diabetes, because I get really bothered when people like, oh, it's just diabetes, or like are unbothered by their diabetes diagnosis. Diabetes can lead to so many complications. It affects so many systems in our body. Some of the complications are like heart and blood vessel disease, nerve damage. So like if you ever heard of diabetic neuropathy, kidney disease, eye damage. It can lead to different kind of skin conditions. Then you have like a slower healing process. You can get hearing impairment. And so I feel like in our community, it's kind of like played down like, oh, it's just diabetes. Like, I'm going to just take insulin and be okay. Yes, we are lucky to have insulin. We are lucky to have all of the different pharmaceutical therapies that we have. However, because it's solely based on lifestyle, it's better to just make those decisions now, like to prevent it. And if it's too late to prevent it, that's okay. Like you can still, make different changes to your lifestyle to prevent the complications of diabetes. So that's something that I really want to stress, because I just feel like in our community, we're just okay with this. Like India mentioned earlier, like, oh, my granddad had diabetes, I'd be all right. You don't know that. Like,
Right.
You don't know if you're going to be okay. Furthermore, like, if you can prevent it, then prevent it. So that's just something that I want to say.
Yeah,
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. And you can do something about it. There's conditions out there where you can't do much about it. You don't have control. The diabetes type 2, I would be specific, type 2 diabetes, 9 times out of 10, you have control. You can proactively or reactively do something about this condition. So I am so glad you pointed that out, Dee, and just continue, we as healthcare professionals can and will continue to urge our community to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Well, Sarah, if you could give our listeners one piece of advice overall about any portion of their health, nutrition related, whatever the case may be, before we close, what piece of advice would you give?
Yeah, so it really goes back to like why my business is named Nutrition with Intention. I really have such a problem with how nutrition is approached from a deficit standpoint, or from a negative standpoint in terms of like restriction over restriction. I want people to really start to focus on addition instead of restriction, excuse me. What am I eating in my diet that is going to set me up for success should be the number one thing that you think about when it comes to your diet, not always what I can take away. Because it's not to say that, eating less candy isn't going to be helpful, or drinking less pop isn't going to be helpful. But okay, once you do that, does that mean that you are automatically adding in the things that are more beneficial? Not necessarily. So I really like to approach it from an addition standpoint. Adding in more nutritionally optimal foods is going to be your best bet when it comes to managing your nutrition effectively.
I love that mindset, to be honest, because you're absolutely right. I actually used to work as a health and wellness coach for WebMD. And so I worked with a lot of people in different populations, pilots, flight attendants, people with really active lifestyles, as in not, exercising, but just active lifestyle. They're constantly on the go. So it's very difficult for them to, choose different paths of nutrition. And they would be honest with me, well, hey, I'm on the go 80% of the time. I don't, have the ability to pack lunches and pack dinners and things like that. So how am I supposed to lose weight, or how am I supposed to manage this condition that I have when I'm constantly on the go? So I think it is a very good idea to think more about what are those little things that I can add that can make a significant difference. Is it that I'm adding, I'm getting a burrito bowl, but I'm adding lettuce to it, or, I'm adding, beans, or, not just getting a bowl of rice with some meat in it. So I think that's a very, very, very good way of helping people be more optimistic and not seeming so daunting to make significant changes by just thinking, well, what can I do, to this small change that can actually be a lasting change and help my overall nutrition. So I think that's a great approach. I love that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Sarah, we want to thank you so much for joining us. I know we can speak for our listeners when we say that we learned a lot today on this episode and the previous one as well. So thank you so much for joining us. And as always, keep it pretty.
Thank you so much for having me.
As always, thank you for joining us for the ride. Be sure to keep in touch by following us on Instagram and subscribing to our YouTube channel at Pretty in Practice. Feel free to send us a DM of any topics you want us to discuss, and you might hear them on a future Pretty in Practice episode. Keep it pretty.